You know the sound. Pound coins rattling into a metal tray at the bottom of a glowing cabinet in the corner of a pub. Warm from the machine, heavy in your cupped hands. For a decade, the voice that followed belonged to Noel Edmonds, asking deal or no deal from a speaker grill in every lounge bar in Britain. That sound, that voice, and over 100 versions of that game were designed, built, and shipped from a single factory on a Nottingham cul-de-sac. 60,000 square feet of cabinet makers, sound engineers, and statisticians opposite a hospital on a quiet residential street. Then an Austrian conglomerate sold the factory to a company that already had one in Wales. 200 workers walked out of the gate for the last time. Today the site is a pay and display car park. No plaque marks the ground. This is the story of Kenyon Wilkinson, an American who crossed the Atlantic with the tooling of a dead Chicago slot machine company and built the machine that defined British pub culture for half a century. And how it was undone, not by one disaster, but by a smoking ban, a frozen steak, a smartphone in every pocket, and an ownership chain that answered to Vienna. Chapter 1. The American and the Tannery. The story begins with a box of dies and a boat ticket. In 1963, an American entrepreneur named Kenyon Wilkinson arrived in Nottingham carrying the last remains of a dead slot machine company, not metaphorically, physically. Wilkinson had acquired the tooling, the die-cast molds, and the intellectual remnants of the Watling Manufacturing Company of Chicago, one of the great names of American mechanical slots, founded in 1903 by Thomas Watling, killed in 1951 by the Johnson Act, which criminalized the interstate transport of gambling devices across America. Watling had fled Chicago for Reno, Nevada. It collapsed there too. Two local businessmen bought the dies and rebranded the product line Bell Fruit, a nod to the bell and fruit reel symbols that had defined American slot machines since the century's turn. That venture also failed. What Wilkinson saw in the wreckage was not an American opportunity. It was a British one. He wasn't alone. His son Kenyon Jr. came with him, along with a Nevada engineer named Lane Fleischer and a fourth partner, Lou Benetti. Between them, they had mechanical expertise, gambling industry knowledge, and an understanding of how coin-operated cabinets actually worked, the physics of reels, the mathematics of payout ratios, the engineering tolerances that kept a machine running through 10,000 plays without jamming. What they didn't have was a market. America's gambling laws had just strangled theirs. Britain's had just opened. The Betting and Gaming Act of 1960 had legalized commercial gambling for the first time. The Gaming Act of 1968 would soon formalize a category of low-stake machine specifically designed for pubs and working men's clubs. Amusement with prizes, AWP, the bureaucratic name for what every British adult would come to know simply as the fruit machine. Wilkinson read the landscape before most British manufacturers had noticed it existed. He crossed the Atlantic, found a shuttered factory on Lean Gate in Lenton, a modest Victorian building that had once been the premises of the tanner Thomas Bailey, later occupied by the Premier Cash Register Company, and on the 16th of July 1963, incorporated Bell Fruit Manufacturing Company Limited. The address told you everything about the ambition. Lean Gate was a cul-de-sac in a residential neighbourhood of terraced houses, directly opposite what would become the Queen's Medical Centre. No industrial estate, no purpose-built facility, a former tannery on a quiet street, and inside it, the tooling of a failed Chicago company being adapted to take British pence instead of American nickels. The first three machines came quickly. Three alike, line 'em up, and penny special. All launched in 1963, all essentially Watling slots rebuilt for the British market. The cabinets were mechanical, the reels spun on physical bearings, and the payout was governed by cams and levers that Fleischer and his colleagues had inherited from a design lineage stretching back to the turn of the century. They were, in the most literal sense, American machines wearing British clothes, and they worked. But Wilkinson understood that working wasn't enough. The existing British trade was already crowded. Ruffler and Walker, Jennings, and a scatter of small operators rebadging imported American cabinets. To survive, Bell Fruit needed something none of them were offering. What Wilkinson did next built the company. Chapter 2. The Brewery Gambit. He went to the brewers, not to the amusement arcade operators, not to the seaside pier owners, not to the working men's clubs. Wilkinson went directly to the Tied House brewery estates, the companies that owned the pubs, and made them a proposition that nobody else in the British fruit machine trade had thought to offer. He persuaded Charrington's brewery to install Bell fruit machines across its pub estate, and in return he gave Charrington something no competitor could match: custom reel symbols featuring Charrington's own beer brands, bespoke front glass with the brewery's livery, and machines that didn't just sit in the corner of the pub. They advertised the pub's own products while taking the punter's money. In effect, Wilkinson invented the in-pub advertising fruit machine. Every spin of the reels carried the brewery's name. Every cabinet was a branded piece of furniture that belonged in that specific pub, not a generic box that could have come from anywhere. The brewers loved it. Charrington's signed. Flowers, brewery followed. Then a wider network, the tied house system that controlled the majority of Britain's pubs, gave Bellfruit access to thousands of sites through a handful of corporate relationships. The genius was structural. Under the Gaming Act, 1968's Schedule 9, pubs could hold only 2 AWP machines without further permits, and the Gaming Board had to certify every manufacturer. That meant 2 things. First, the total addressable market per pub was tiny, 2 machines, full stop. Second, the barrier to entry was bureaucratic, not just commercial. You couldn't simply make fruit machines. You had to be approved to make them. And once you were approved, and once you had the brewery relationships, and once your cabinets were already sitting in 2,000 pubs with custom brewery glass, the switching cost for your customers was enormous. Why would Charrington's rip out a Bell fruit machine carrying its own branding and replace it with a generic Ruffler and Walker box? Wilkinson's brewery Gambit turned a regulatory constraint into a commercial moat, and Bellfruit began to grow. By 1969, the firm had launched the Wildcat, its first fully electric cabinet, a step beyond the purely mechanical Watling-derived machines into a world of solenoids, relay logic, and illuminated reel panels that could flash, chase, and beckon in ways that no cam and lever mechanism could match. By 1970, Bellfruit was exporting electromechanical units into the Netherlands and West Germany, where more liberal arcade laws had created a mass market for coin-operated amusement. The Lenton factory, still housed in Thomas Bailey's old tannery, was running at capacity. The Wilkinsons sold in 1967, just 4 years after founding, and well before the full fruits of the brewery strategy had ripened. The buyer was Cope Allman International plc, a British industrial conglomerate that collected manufacturing businesses the way some people collect stamps, methodically, without much sentiment, and with an eye to the portfolio rather than the product. Under Cope Allman, Bellfruit entered the 1970s with more than 800 workers on the Leangate payroll, 800 people making fruit machines in a converted tannery on a Nottingham cul-de-sac. The Americans' bet had paid out, but Cope Allman managed the way conglomerates manage. The electromechanical to electronic transition of the late 1970s required investment at exactly the moment the wider British economy was contracting. By the early 1980s, the Lenton headcount had been cut from more than 800 to below 300, a painful restructuring that shed experienced mechanical workers and replaced some of them with a smaller number of electronic engineers. The ones who stayed saw the introduction of the Scorpion microprocessor platform in the mid-1980s. Scorpion 1, the hardware architecture that would, in various iterations, underpin Bellfruit machines for the next 3 decades. The Scorpion board was compact, programmable and modular. It meant that a new game didn't require a new cabinet. It required new software, new reel strips, new artwork, but the bones of the machine stayed the same. One platform, endless variations. The economics of fruit machine manufacturing had just changed forever, and in February 1987, the payoff arrived. The Lenton Listener, the neighbourhood paper, reported that a new purpose-built 60,000 square foot factory was going up across Leangate to replace the cramped Victorian tannery. Bellfruit was building itself a proper home. The same paper recorded that the UK market had grown to roughly 60,000 pub and arcade machines, plus 8 to 10,000 club jackpot units a year, serviced by just 5 major British makers. Bellfruit shared second place with Barcrest, then owned by the Bass Brewing Group. JPM International of Wolverhampton led the pack, but Lenton was catching up. Chapter 3. 5 owners, 1 address. Bellfruit rarely belonged to the people who ran it. That was the pattern, and it set in early. After Cope Allman came Koenig plc and the German Gauselmann Group, who acquired the firm jointly in 1997, plugging Bellfruit into continental European distribution networks for the first time since the early export experiments of the 1970s. In 1999, the company was renamed Bellfruit Games Limited, a deliberate signal. Not Bellfruit Manufacturing, not Bellfruit Engineering, Games. The emphasis shifted from the cabinet to what was on the screen. Hardware was a commodity, software was the margin. The people who designed the game, the mathematicians who calibrated payout ratios to within fractions of a percentage, the graphic artists who created the real symbols, the sound engineers who composed the jingles that burrowed into a punter's brain, those were the people who mattered now. Then came the Austrians. In 2004, Novomatic AG, the gaming conglomerate based in Gumpoldskirchen, Lower Austria, founded by Johann Graf, took a controlling position in Bellfruit as part of a methodical sweep of European amusement suppliers. Novomatic's UK vehicle was Astra Games of Bridgend, South Wales, which Novomatic had also acquired a majority stake in that same year. Astra House, the Bridgend headquarters, opened on Kingsway at the Bridgend Industrial Estate on 29 November 2007. The geography mattered. Novomatic now had 2 British factories, one in Nottingham, one in South Wales, making similar products for the same market. That redundancy would prove fatal, but not yet. The final piece of consolidation came in July 2012, when Astra acquired the entire Danoptra Gaming Group. Danoptra bundled Bellfruit, GamesTech Leisure, RLMS, Sales, and Nottingham-based Mazuma Interactive Games into a single package. For 7 years, Bellfruit, Astra, and their siblings sat inside what Novomatic called the Gaming Technology Group, a hydra of British manufacturers now owned from Lower Austria, managed through Bridgend, and still making machines in the same Lenton cul-de-sac where Kenyon Wilkinson had unpacked his Chicago dies. 5 owners in 39 years. American founders, a British conglomerate, a German-British joint venture, an Austrian mega-corporation. Each transaction moved the decision-making a little further from Lean Gate. Each one added a layer of corporate distance between the people who designed and built the machines and the people who decided whether the factory would survive. And through all of it, the address stayed the same, NG7 2LX, opposite the hospital, the cul-de-sac that made fruit machines. Chapter 4. 60,000 square feet of noise. A young engineer arriving at the Lean Gate factory for the first time in the early 2000s would have smelled the ozone before reaching the door. Fresh circuit boards give off a particular scent, sharp, metallic, faintly electrical, that settles into the fabric of your clothes and stays there. Inside, the 60,000 square foot plant was louder than you'd expect. Not the thunderous roar of a steelworks or a pressing shop, but a persistent, layered industrial hum. The whine of cabinet framing jigs cutting aluminium, the clatter of coin hoppers being tested on the quality line, the rhythmic thunk of screen basils being fitted into housings, and underneath it all, the low electronic murmur of 100 machines in various stages of assembly, each one running test cycles that sent cascades of simulated coins through their mechanisms. Managing Director Chris Butler described the layout to Intergame magazine as a fully integrated design and assembly operation. In-house mechanical engineers designed the cabinets. Software developers wrote the game logic. Statisticians, because AWP mathematics is regulated to the decimal point by the Gambling Commission, calibrated the payout percentages. Graphic artists created real symbols and bonus round animations. And then there was Robert Hassel, the in-house sound engineer and composer, working from a studio tucked inside the factory, building the soundscapes that would loop in British pubs for years. Hassel reportedly drew from the same sample libraries used on the Christopher Nolan Batman film soundtracks when composing Bellfruit's Batman, The Dark Knight Machine. The jingle that played when a punter hit the bonus round on a deal or no deal cabinet, that 3-second burst of orchestral tension followed by the Noel Edmonds Deal or No Deal voice sample, was designed, mixed, and mastered in a room surrounded by factory noise in a Nottingham cul-de-sac. A 2015 Knots TV documentary tour captured the production floor in full sensory detail. Pallets of screen bezels stacked against one wall, rolls of printed artwork waiting to be cut and mounted. On the testing racks, a wall of completed machines running simultaneously, incandescent bulbs behind perforated reels glowing red and gold, attract modes cycling through their programmed sequences, coin mechanisms clicking through acceptance and rejection tests, the smell of solder flux drifting from the board assembly area, the rattle of metal on metal from the cabinet line, and, at the end of the process, finished machines wrapped in protective film, loaded onto pallets and driven out through loading bay doors that opened onto a residential street. Operations Director John Lenton, interviewed during that same tour, said something that landed quietly at the time and echoes now. "A lot of our employees have been with us for over 25 years, he told the camera. 25 years. Workers who'd started under Cope Allman, survived the Koenig transition, adapted to Novamatic's ownership, learned the Scorpion platform and its successors, and were still walking through the same gate on the same cul-de-sac. Multi-generational employment was common. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, the kind of deep institutional knowledge that lives in hands and habits rather than manuals, knowing by feel when a coin mechanism is slightly out of tolerance, knowing by sound when a hopper motor is running a fraction slow, knowing which batch of circuit boards from which supplier tends to develop dry joints after 6 months in a damp pub. The stated production cadence was a new game model every 8 weeks, 8 weeks from concept to shipping crate. That extraordinary tempo was possible because the Scorpion platform's modularity meant each new title was essentially a software and artwork package dropped into a standardized cabinet. The mechanical bones, the hopper, the coin validator, the reel assembly, the power supply, the screen mounting, stayed constant. What changed was the game, the theme, the bonus rounds, the feature trails, the branded artwork, the sound design. Bellfruit's principal customers were the brewery pub estates. The old Charrington and Flowers relationships had evolved through decades of consolidation into Whitbread, Bass, Scottish and Newcastle, Mitchells and Butlers, J.D. Wetherspoon, Enterprise Inns, and Punch Taverns. The big route operators, GameStech, PlayNation, CLMS, Inspired, bought in bulk. And via RLMS Sales, a Novamatic stablemate and in-house distributor, Bellfruit supplied the arcade and social club channel too. Exports ran through Novamatic's continental distribution pipework into the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Spain, Poland, and the Czech Republic. British bookmakers were a smaller market. The fixed odds, betting terminal territory belonged to Barcrest and Inspired Virtuals. Bellfruit's heartland was the pub, the lounge bar, the corner near the toilets and the cigarette machine, where 2 glowing cabinets sat side by side, taking pound coins and paying out in warm metal. Chapter 5. 100 Deals. When Endemol's Deal or No Deal debuted on Channel 4 on 31st October 2005, nobody at Bellfruit could have predicted what would follow. The show, Noel Edmonds opening red boxes, a faceless banker making telephone offers, contestants agonizing over whether to gamble or walk away, was built on exactly the emotional mechanics that fruit machine designers had been engineering for decades. Risk, reward, the moment of decision, the physical act of choosing. Bellfruit moved fast. Under a license negotiated with Endemol, the first Deal or No Deal, AWP, shipped in 2006. The game translated to the pub format with an almost suspicious perfection. The red boxes became real symbols and bonus round features. The banker's offer became a gamble mechanic. Noel Edmonds' voice, sampled, compressed, looped, rang out from pub corners across Britain every time a punter hit the feature. And punters hit the feature constantly because Bellfruit's statisticians had calibrated the game to deliver frequent small wins, occasional medium payouts, and just enough jackpot-level events to keep the regulars feeding coins. The numbers tell the story of a licensing goldmine. By 2015, Bellfruit announced its 100th distinct Deal or No Deal variant. 100 versions of the same television tie-in, each one tweaked, rebranded, and remarketed as a fresh experience. Game On shipped in 2007, The Dream Factory in 2008. Then came Make or Break, Red Mist, Banker Rings Twice, Spank the Banker, Rapid Round, Double D&D. The big one arrived in September 2013, Windfall in May 2014, Maximum in 2015, which added a red Ask Noel button to the cabinet fascia, a physical piece of branded interaction that punters could press to trigger a bonus feature. Club Maximum Deal or No Deal followed in 2016, a Category B4 variant designed for the higher stakes social club market. Trade press and collector forums agreed on one point. Any British pub carrying 2 Category C machines in the early 2000s almost certainly had at least one Bellfruit deal or no deal on the wall. The game show had become the game, and Bellfruit had become the game show. But the DOND franchise, dominant as it was, overshadowed a deep catalogue that deserved its own recognition. Cops and Robbers, Bellfruit's oldest continuous brand, traced its lineage to a Dutch Scorpion 1 machine in 1986. It survived through 1990s club wraparound trail variants and was revived as Cops and Robbers Streetwise in October 2012, then Gold Bullion in 2018, then Big Money. The Monopoly license from Hasbro produced a string of variants: Monopoly Millionaire, Diamond Edition, High Roller, Real Estate, Millionaire's Row, that together formed the biggest branded pub AWP series before Deal or No Deal existed. There was a Batman, the Dark Knight machine with Robert Hassell's Nolan-sourced soundscapes, a Queen rock band cabinet, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Big Bank Theory, Chase the Rainbow, Dell's Millions, the Only Fools and Horses tie-in from the 1990s that put David Jason's face on a reel strip and paid out to the sound of Lovely Jubbly, television tie-ins with I'm a Celebrity, Shooting Stars, The Royal Family, Ant and Dec, company literature of the period, press packs, exhibition brochures, the Invest in Nottingham promotional materials, claimed Bellfruit consistently generates more successful products than any other company in the UK and Europe. Trade magazine Coinslot and Intergame regularly described the firm as the leading UK manufacturer of Category C games. Managing Director John Austin, a long-tenure Nottingham figure in the trade, told Invest in Nottingham in 2015, "We are a fairly significant employer of Nottingham people since 1963. Austin said something else in that interview, something that, read back now, carries a weight he couldn't have intended. Our future, he said, is online as well as continuing to manufacture in Nottingham. As well as, not instead of, as well as. It was 2015. The factory was running. 100 deal or no deal variants had shipped. The ICE Totally Gaming exhibition stand was booked. The Leangate car park was full every morning. Chris Butler was giving factory tours to trade journalists. John Lowton's 25-year employees were still walking through the gate. Robert Hassell was still composing jingles in his studio, surrounded by the hum of the production floor. And beneath all of it, beneath the noise, the ozone, the clatter of hoppers and the flash of reels, the ground was already moving. Chapter 6. The Four Horsemen. The British pub fruit machine didn't die of one wound. It bled from 4, and each one opened before the last had closed. The first was legislative. The Gambling Act 2005, which took effect on September 1st, 2007, replaced the Gaming Act 1968 and imposed a new machine category structure. Categories A through D, with subcategories B, 1 through B4, via the Categories of Gaming Machine Regulations 2007. Category C was Bellfruit's heartland, the pub machine, the lounge bar corner cabinet. Under the new regime, Category C was capped at a £1 stake and a £100 maximum prize, with pubs automatically entitled to 2 such machines on their premises. Machine Games Duty taxed Category C takings at 20%. The limits barely moved. The 2013 Triennial Review produced modest adjustments. Subsequent reviews offered little more. A £1 stake in 2007 was still a £1 stake in 2015, in 2018, in 2019. Inflation alone made the machines less attractive with each passing year. A punter who'd happily fed pound coins into a cabinet in 2005 could feel, by 2015, that the stake brought less excitement than it used to. Because it did. The prize ceiling hadn't kept pace with what £100 could buy. The economics of the pub fruit machine were being slowly starved by the calendar. The second wound was smoking. The Health Act 2006 banned smoking in enclosed public spaces across England, taking effect on 1st July 2007, the same year the Gambling Act landed. The impact on pub footfall was immediate and brutal. Analysis of British Beer and Pub Association data by the Institute of Economic Affairs showed pub closure rates leaping from 0.65% a year before the ban to 2.8% a year afterwards. In 2007 alone, 1,409 pubs closed, against an expected 369. an excess of roughly 1,000 closures in a single year, directly attributable to the ban. The total UK pub estate fell from 60,800 in the year 2000 to around 45,000 by 2024, a 35% collapse across 2 decades. Each lost pub meant 2 fewer Category C sites. Each surviving pub had less dwell time, fewer customers lingering over a second pint, fewer smoker regulars who'd once stood at the bar feeding pound coins into the machine between cigarettes. The fruit machine had always been a secondary entertainment, something you played while you were already in the pub. When people stopped being in the pub, they stopped playing the machine. Belfruit couldn't sell cabinets into premises that no longer existed. The third wound was cannibalization, and it came from inside the gambling industry itself. Fixed odds betting terminals, FOBTs, had been introduced into UK betting shops around 2001. Category B2 machines. They looked nothing like a pub fruit machine. They were sleek, touchscreen operated, and they offered something Belfruit's cabinets never could: a £100 stake every 20 seconds. Each FOBT earned its operator roughly £52,000 a year, more than double the average UK salary. Industry-wide, FOBTs produced approximately £1.8 billion in gross revenue. They were, in the words of Labour MP Carolyn Harris, chair of the FOBT All-Party Parliamentary Group, the crack cocaine of gambling. Ian Duncan Smith joined the campaign. So did Ronnie Cowan and Tom Watson. The machines drew in exactly the demographic that had once played pub AWPs: young men, regular gamblers, people looking for a quick hit of risk and reward, and offered them stakes and prizes that a £1 Category C cabinet couldn't begin to match. For 2 decades, FOBTs quietly strip-mined Belfruit's customer base. Then, on May 17, 2018, Culture Secretary Matt Hancock and Sports Minister Tracy Crouch announced that the maximum FOBT stake would be cut from £100 to £2. Crouch resigned in November 2018 in protest at the government's delay in implementing the reduction. The £2 stake took effect on April 1, 2019. William Hill announced the closure of roughly 700 shops. Ladbrokes Coral flagged up to 900. The total UK betting shop estate fell from approximately 8,400 to 5,800 by early 2025. The FOBT ecosystem, which had cannibalized Belfruit's pub customers for 2 decades, now imploded. But it didn't send those customers back to the pub, it sent them to their phones, which was the 4th wound and the deepest. After the Gambling Act 2005 and the Gambling, Licensing and Advertising Act 2014, the UK online gambling market detonated. By 2024 to 25, remote casino, betting and bingo gross gaming yield reached £7.8 billion, 46% of the entire British gambling market. Online slots alone generated £4.2 billion. A £1 stake pub cabinet sitting in a corner near the toilets could not compete with a smartphone offering 24-hour access to jackpots 100 times larger. Played from the sofa, with no need to leave the house, find a pub that hadn't closed, or carry a pocket full of pound coins. 4 wounds, a frozen steak, a smoking ban, a parasitic competitor that cannibalized the customer base, then destroyed itself, and a smartphone in every pocket. Together, not separately, together, they killed the British pub fruit machine. Chapter 7. The competitors fall first. Belfruit was not alone in the dark. Every major British fruit machine manufacturer was caught in the same collapsing structure, and most of them fell before Lenton did. Barcrest, the name synonymous with Rainbow Riches, the other great British pub brand, had been sold by Bass to IGT in 1998. IGT passed it to Scientific Games via Global Draw Limited for roughly $35 million in cash in September 2011. Scientific Games rebranded itself as Light & Wonder in 2022, and Barcrest survived principally as an online slot label, the name on a digital product, disconnected from any British factory floor. The machines that had once been built in Ashton-under-Lyne were now algorithms running on servers. Maygay Machines of Basildon, founded by Roy Howell, had been sold by 3i Group to LeisureLink for £18.5 million in 2000. 2 years later, Maygay was absorbed into Barcrest and ceased to exist as an independent manufacturer. JPM International of Wolverhampton, The firm that had led the British market in 1987, the year Belfruit's new factory opened, entered administration around 2013, weighed down by inherited pension obligations that its dwindling revenues could no longer service. JPM survives only as JPM Interactive, an online label. Mazuma Interactive Games, Nottingham-based and once a Belfruit neighbour, was absorbed into the Danoptra Gaming Group, passed to Novomatic in the 2012 consolidation, and its intellectual property eventually spun out into Blueprint Gaming, now owned by Gauselmann. And Project Coin Machines of Plymouth, the last independent British fruit machine manufacturer of any scale, was formally dissolved on 6th May 2019. 5 weeks. 5 weeks after the FOBT stake cut took effect, the last independent maker was gone. The pattern was consistent: sale to a larger group. Absorption. Name retained as a digital label. Factory closed. Workers dispersed. The physical act of manufacturing British fruit machines, the cabinet framing, the board assembly, the hopper installation, the artwork mounting, the testing, the palletizing, the loading bay, was being eliminated company by company, site by site. By 2018, the question was no longer whether this would happen to Belfruit. It was when and who would make the call. Chapter 8. Vienna Calls. The call came from Austria, not from Nottingham, not from Bridgend, not from anywhere in Britain. From Gumpoldskirchen, Lower Austria, where Novomatic AG had been navigating a political crisis that made the fate of a Nottingham fruit machine factory feel very small indeed. On the 17th of May 2019, Der Spiegel and Süddeutsche Zeitung published the secretly recorded Ibiza video, footage from July 2017, showing FPÖ leader and then Austrian Vice-Chancellor Heinz Christian Strache appearing to offer state contracts to a woman posing as a Russian oligarch's niece. Strache named Novomatic as allegedly channeling concealed political donations. Novomatic denied the allegation. The video collapsed Sebastian Kurz's coalition government the following day. An overlapping investigation, the Casinos Austria affair, alleged that FPÖ councillor Peter Sidlow had been appointed CFO of part state-owned Casinos Austria AG in 2019, while Novomatic held 17.2% of the business, allegedly in exchange for promised market liberalisation that would have granted Novomatic a Vienna casino licence. In February 2026, Austria's WKStA filed criminal charges against Strache, Novomatic founder Johann Graf, former Novomatic CEO Harald Neumann, and Novomatic AG as a corporate entity for alleged corruption offences. Neumann had already stepped down as CEO of Novomatic's ASX-listed affiliate Ainsworth Game Technology in October 2025, after the Nevada Gaming Control Board declined to renew his licence. Novomatic has consistently and publicly denied all allegations. Against that backdrop, political scandal in Vienna, regulatory pressure across multiple jurisdictions, a founder facing criminal charges, the strategic logic of holding a British fruit machine factory on a Nottingham cul-de-sac became difficult to defend in any boardroom presentation. Novomatic's UK gaming technology group, Astra, Belfruit, GamesTech, PlayNation, Harlequin Gaming, Innovate, RLMS, had become strategically awkward. A hardware manufacturing problem attached to an online-led group whose growth engine was the digital arm GreenTube, acquired in 2010. The British factories made physical machines for a market that was shrinking by the month. GreenTube made digital games for a market that was growing by the day. The arithmetic wasn't complicated. On the 11th of June 2019, Novomatic announced the sale of the gaming technology group to Inspired Entertainment, incandescent, a NASDAQ-listed lottery and virtual sports specialist based in New York. The transaction was cleared by the UK Competition and Markets Authority in September 2019 and completed in October 2019 for approximately $120 million in cash. The deal transferred Belfruit, Astra, GamesTech, PlayNation, Harlequin and Innov, 8 to a buyer whose strategic interest was not in Nottingham craftsmanship, but in acquiring a land-based machines footprint quickly and cheaply. Novomatic retained Astra's casino assets, Novomatic Gaming UK Limited, still at Astra House, Bridgend under Managing Director Phil Burke, and the luxury leisure and Admiral Casino arcade chains through other UK vehicles. For Inspired Entertainment, the acquisition made immediate financial sense. They now had two British factories, 60,000 square feet in Nottingham, 45,000 square feet in Bridgend, making similar products for the same shrinking market. One of them was redundant. The Bridgend plant had never stopped being the group's production hub under Novomatic. It had the newer equipment. It had the supply chain relationships. It had the postcode that was already on the shipping labels. Lenton had history. Lenton had the workers whose hands knew the tolerances. Lenton had the address that had been making fruit machines since 1963. And Lenton had a location, a residential cul-de-sac opposite a hospital, that made it spectacularly easy to close and spectacularly difficult to expand. The decision was not difficult. It was not agonized over. It was the kind of decision that spreadsheets make before people do. Chapter 9. The Last Shift. Inspired consolidated manufacturing on the Bridgend site almost immediately. The lean gate workers found out the way workers usually find out, not from a ceremony, not from a managing director standing on the factory floor with a megaphone, but from the accumulating evidence of decisions already made. Production orders redirected to Wales, new tooling commissioned for Bridgend rather than Nottingham, meeting invitations that stopped arriving, the institutional body language of a company turning away from one site and towards another. Collector forums captured the sequence in real time. In December 2019, posts on penny machines and Fruit Emu reported that most of Belfruit's site next to the QMC hospital in Lenton was closing. By mid-2020, Flickr captions from former staff carried the tone of an obituary. "The whole Belfruit site in Nottingham is now shut down," one wrote. "Very sad after being there for nearly 60 years. Approximately 200 Lenton-based staff were in scope. 200. Not the 800 of the 1970s peak, but 200 people who still walked through that gate every morning, who still smelled the ozone from the board line, who still tested coin hoppers on the quality racks, who still loaded pallets through the loading bay doors onto a residential street. LinkedIn profiles from the period tell a scatterpattern story. Some transferred to Inspired's Bridgend or US offices. Some took redundancy. Some moved into Nottingham's wider tech sector. Some simply disappeared from the digital record the way workers always do when a factory closes. No farewell press conference, no valedictory interview, just a last walk through a gate you'd walked through for 25 years, and then the gate was locked behind you. No formal Save the Factory campaign, no petition, no parliamentary intervention. Lillian Greenwood, the Labour MP for Nottingham South, whose constituency covered Lenton, does not appear in Hansard in connection with the closure. The contrast with the political theatre around the Horizon Tobacco Factory closure 4 years earlier, Imperial Tobacco, 540 jobs, 130 years of Nottingham cigarette production, picket lines, press conferences, front-page Nottingham Post coverage, was striking, or with the Bombardier and Rolls-Royce disputes of the same period, which generated ministerial statements and trade union campaigns. Belfruit closed quietly. A 56-year-old manufacturer, once the second-largest producer of the machines that defined British pub life, dissolved with less public notice than a mid-range restaurant shutting on a high street. The trade press covered it. G3 Newswire, Insider Media, Casino Beats, Yoganet, Coinslot, in the measured language of industry journalism. But the Nottingham Post didn't give it the front page. The BBC East Midlands Regional News didn't mark it. No one marched. No one chained themselves to the factory gate. The machines just stopped, and the silence settled in. John Austin, who'd told a Notts TV camera in 2015 that Belfruit's future was online as well as continuing to manufacture in Nottingham, was not publicly quoted on the closure. John Lenton, whose 25-year employees now walked out of the gate for the last time, left no public statement. Wanda Osinska, the long-serving group sales and customer liaison manager whose retirement had already been marked in Coinslot, had exited before the end. The older guard had gone. The younger ones were being told to go. The last deal or no deal variants, the last cops and robbers cabinets, the last machines to carry the Belfruit badge and a Nottingham postcode rolled off the lean gate lines into a market that was contracting beneath them. One collector, posting on penny machines, offered an epitaph that no trade journalist would have printed. To be honest, there's only so many times you can keep doing DOND before it all goes tits up. The machines were a bit poo towards the end. The Pub Fruit Machine's Eulogy, delivered in the authentic register of the Pub Fruit Machine's audience. Chapter 10. The Car Park and the Ghost. Company's House records the aftermath in the language of corporate dissolution. Bellfruit Services Limited, Company number 081422287, dissolved 3rd April 2018. Bellfruit Games Limited, Company number 081422284, dissolved 13th April 2021, dormant at the time. Bellfruit Group Limited, formerly Astra Entertainment Limited, Company number 050155596, dissolved 17th September 2024. Every UK Bellfruit legal entity is now gone. The last registered office, at first floor, 107 Station Street, Burton-on-Trent, is an accountancy address. The bellfruit.com and bellfruitgames.co.uk websites are inactive. The bellfruit.co.uk domain resolves to a password-protected portal. Wildcat, System, Homepage, named after the 1969 cabinet that marked Bellfruit's first step into electric machines. A Bellfruit LinkedIn page persists, tagged Essential Entertainment, now part of Inspired Entertainment, a digital headstone. The brand survives, barely, as Bellfruit Game Studio on Inspired Entertainment's iGaming portfolio, producing online versions of Cops and Robbers, Big Money, Gold Winner, Golden Winner, and seasonal Christmas and Halloween variants. The name still appears on a screen. But no one in Nottingham builds what the screen displays. Physical manufacturing continues at Astra House, Bridgend. The machines that go into the pubs that remain carry a Welsh postcode now. Spare parts for legacy Scorpion cabinets circulate through collector networks. The Fruit Emu and Penny Machines forums where former engineers trade board repair advice and source replacement hopper motors for machines that left the Lean Gate factory a decade ago. Deal or no deal cabinets sell on eBay UK for £150 to £480, depending on condition. The rarer 1960s mechanical bandits, the Watling-derived machines that Wilkinson brought across the Atlantic, are modestly collectible, curiosities from an era before microprocessors and branded television tie-ins. Nottingham Industrial Museum, a volunteer-run operation housed in the stables at Wallerton Hall, posted an appeal on penny machines seeking a Bellfruit 7T, serial number 602419, manufactured in Nottingham at the recently closed Lean Gate factory. Active local interest, no dedicated exhibit. The National Video Game Museum in Sheffield, which might seem a natural home, focuses on console and video arcade games and lists no Bellfruit AWP holding. The British Museum keeps only a biographical authority record for Nottingham Bellfruit Limited. Online galleries at penny-arcade.info and pennymachines.co.uk preserve the catalogue in photograph. Hundreds of cabinet fascias, real layouts, and bonus trail designs frozen in digital amber. And the Lean Gate site itself is a study in post-industrial anticlimax. In September 2020, Minster Developments submitted a planning application to Nottingham City Council for a 1,500-space, multi-storey car park on the site, primarily to serve the Queen's Medical Centre opposite, whose staff parking waiting list stood at over 1,200. The application was withdrawn. No substantial redevelopment has been approved since. In 2025 and 2026, the buildings remain standing, partly used as P2 Lean Gate, pay and display overflow parking for the hospital. The original 1880s tannery, Thomas Bailey's building where Kenyon Wilkinson unpacked his Chicago dyes, was converted to flats years earlier. There is no blue plaque. There is no civic commemoration. A pay and display machine stands where coin payout machines were once built. The car park charges by the hour. The factory charged by the play. Chapter 11. The Weight of a Pound Coin. If you grew up in Britain between 1990 and 2015, you knew this object. You didn't think about it. You didn't admire it. But you knew it, the way you knew the pattern on a bus seat or the sound of a pub door closing on a Friday night. It was there, a glowing cabinet in the corner of the lounge bar, somewhere between the toilets and the quiz machine, radiating a particular kind of warm, flickering, slightly desperate light. You knew the weight of the coin in your hand before you fed it in. You knew the mechanical clunk of the validator accepting it, that brief, satisfying resistance followed by the drop. You knew the click, click, hold rhythm of the reels, the nudge button under your thumb, the way the feature trail lit up in sequence, chasing upward toward a jackpot you almost never hit, but always, always believed was one more pound away. You knew the sound of the hopper paying out. Not a digital chime, not a notification ping, but the physical rattle of metal coins falling into a metal tray, warm from the machine's interior, heavy in your cupped hands. That sound, that particular sound. Designed in a studio in Nottingham, tested on a factory floor in Lenton, heard in every pub in Britain. Peter Kay built a joke around it. In Phoenix Nights, Brian Potter is crushed by a floating fruit machine at the Aquarius Club. The gag works because every British adult over 35 recognised the object instantly, knew its weight, its shape, the particular way it dominated a small room. In Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy's face appeared on a bell fruit reel strip, and the machine paid out to the sound of Lovely Jubbly. The fruit machine was not incidental to British pub culture, it was constitutive of it. And for a decade, from the first deal or no deal variant in 2006 to the 100th in 2015, the machine in the corner was overwhelmingly a bell fruit product. It was built by people whose names don't appear in any history of British manufacturing. No heritage plaque records them. No museum exhibit honours their craft. John Lowton's 25-year employees. Robert Hassell's compositions. The statisticians who calibrated payout ratios to the third decimal point. The graphic artists who painted real symbols that a million bleary eyes would watch spin at 10:30 on a Saturday night. The mechanical engineers who kept the hopper tolerances tight enough that a machine could pay out £50 in coins without jamming. The cabinet framers, the board assemblers, the testers, the packers, the workers who walked through a gate on a Nottingham cul-de-sac opposite a hospital for 25 years, making objects that sat in the corners of rooms where the rest of Britain went to forget the working week. The arc from Kenyon Wilkinson's Chicago tooling to the dissolved shell company at a Burton-on-Trent accountant's address is not a story of incompetence. Bellfruit outlasted JPM, outlasted Independent Barcrest, outlasted Maygay, outlasted Project Coin, outlasted Mazuma. It survived the electromechanical transition. It survived 5 changes of ownership. It survived the smoking ban, the Category C freeze, the FOBT years. What it could not survive was the combination. A policy stack that individually seemed reasonable and collectively proved lethal, attached to an ownership chain that ended in an Austrian boardroom where a Nottingham cul-de-sac was a line item, not a legacy. The Novomatic corruption cases now working their way through Austrian courts are a reminder that the money which ultimately owned Britain's pub fruit machines answered to politics in Vienna, not to the workers in Nottingham. The $120 million that Inspired Entertainment paid for the gaming technology group bought them a brand, a catalogue, and a Welsh factory. It did not buy them the knowledge that lived in the hands of the Lenton workforce, the feel for tolerances, the instinct for a hopper motor running slow, the 25 years of walking through the same gate. That knowledge walked out of the gate for the last time sometime in early 2020, and no transaction, no acquisition, no corporate reshuffle will recover it. The site today serves a hospital car park, a pay and display machine where a coin payout machine used to be built. Across the street, the Queen's Medical Centre employs most of Lenton now. The original tannery is flats. The 60,000 square foot factory is a parking overflow. There is no plaque. There is no commemoration. On a cul-de-sac in Nottingham for 56 years, bells rang and reels spun, and an American's bet on British pub culture paid out, until it didn't.